Summer 1943, Camp Crossville, Tennessee. The bottle hissed open and a brown fizz rose to the lip, catching the eye of a German soldier who had never in his life seen anything quite like it. 2 years in North Africa on hard biscuits and ersatz coffee had trained him to expect little and savor less. Yet here, in a prison camp on American soil, a sweet carbonated drink called Coca-Cola, 5 cents at the canteen, guards said, the same nickel American kids spent from their allowance, sat cold in his hand. That first sip didn't just quench thirst, it punched a hole through a worldview. Across the United States that summer, 371,683 German prisoners of war would confront the same rupture. This was not the America they had been taught to hate, soft, divided, decadent. This was a country where ice cream was commonplace dessert, where soft drinks were everyday beverages, where candy bars were so ordinary that guards sometimes handed them out. For men raised on narratives of martial virtue forged in scarcity, these small, sweet things, sugar crystals, bubbles in a bottle, a scoop of vanilla, became a language more persuasive than any loudspeaker. Abundance, spelled out in chocolate and carbonation, turned noble sacrifice into needless suffering. The lesson arrived not in lectures, but in meals, not as theory, but as taste. The desert campaign ended. When the Africa Corps capitulated in Tunisia in May 1943, roughly 250,000 German and Italian troops passed into Allied custody. They were battle-hardened men who had shoved the British back toward Egypt under Rommel's banner, and they braced for brutality. Propaganda at home had primed them to expect starvation and cruelty. Instead, within hours of capture, they met the American K ration, the same box U.S. soldiers complained about in their letters, a joke among GIs, felt like treasure in German hands. Crackers, processed cheese, candy, fruit bars, instant coffee, sugar tablets, cigarettes. For men who would scrape by on meager rations for months, that emergency meal was a feast. Army paperwork from processing stations in North Africa recorded pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, and milk, foods that had vanished from German supply tables long before. The United States did not wait to feed enemies well. It did so immediately and systematically. No one understood the full psychological fallout at first. The prisoners did. They ate in silence, glancing at one another as if the plates might be snatched away. Then came the crossing. Liberty ships, mass-produced at a speed that defied belief, one completed at peak every 42 hours, moved up to 30,000 prisoners a month to America. Naval records say the rations for prisoners matched or exceeded crew provisions, about 3,500 calories a day, with fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and coffee that came with sugar and milk. Standard refrigeration on these vessels kept food fresh from one ocean to the other, and the detail that poured cold astonishment straight into the gut. Ice cream. Logs from the USS General M.B. Stewart in July 1943 note ice cream served to prisoners on July 4th, made right there in a shipboard machine that churned 10 gallons at a time. In the middle of the Atlantic, men who hadn't seen ice cream since before the war were handed bowls of it. What ideology survives that bite? Dockside, the numbers got bigger and the lesson louder. At Norfolk and Newport News, the scale of American industry flexed in plain view. The Norfolk Naval Base, sprawled over 4,300 acres with long runs of waterfront, pushed more cargo in a day than major German ports managed in a week. In port exchanges, shops meant for workers, prisoners caught a glimpse of shelves that seemed to refill themselves. Candy bars from Hershey, Mars, Nestlé, price tags set at 5 cents, the same price charged from coast to coast. Procurement ledgers from 1943 list dozens of candy varieties stocked and sold at that uniform nickel. It wasn't just sweetness, it was standardization you could taste. The journey inland unfolded like a rolling civics class in plenty. These men did not travel in Europe's cattle cars. They rode passenger coaches. Dining cars offered full meals. Menus from July 1943 bragged about fried chicken, vegetables, pie, and coffee. The kicker? None of this was a show put on for prisoners. It was just how American railroads fed people. Inside the wire, America looked nothing like the monster of Nazi posters. The camp system was built to exceed the Geneva Convention. Electric lights, hot water, flush toilets, heated barracks. Camp Crossville was typical of the larger facilities. But the place that did the deepest work on the mind was more humble. The Post Exchange. Quartermaster Records, multiple soft drink brands, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, an array of candy bars and confections, ice cream where freezers allowed, cigarettes and tobacco, fresh fruit, snacks, and beer at 3.2%. Prisoners earned 80 cents a day for labor, later $1. At 5 cents per soda or candy bar, a day's pay could buy 16 small luxuries, things so rare back home that only connections could get them, and sometimes not even then. One bottle became the symbol, Coca-Cola. Company ledgers show 5 billion bottles produced in 1943 alone, backed by a military promise to put a 5-cent Coke within reach of every American serviceman worldwide. That meant factories, trucks, rail cars, syrup tankers, bottlers, an entire web of coordination stretching from Atlanta's concentrate to bottling lines scattered across the country. German prisoners met a beverage they'd barely heard of and discovered it seemingly everywhere. Canteens got regular deliveries. Work details saw the coolers in gas stations, schools, and factories. People drank it casually and left half-empty bottles on benches. Technically inclined prisoners fixated on the sameness. Coke tasted identical in Maine and Texas. That level of quality control surpassed anything German industry had put in the field. Company archive notes show some camps receiving 200, 300 cases a week, 24 bottles per case. Camp Hearn, Texas alone, went through about 7,000 bottles every week in the summer of 1943. Ice cream, the improbable miracle, kept reappearing. Army records mark regular service in camps, with reliable refrigeration during hot months. The military believed ice cream mattered for morale so much that it built specialized ice cream ships for the Pacific Fleet. At Camp Shelby, Mississippi, a July 4, 1943 celebration included fresh batches churned on site in hand-cranked freezers. Ice, salt, cream, sugar, flavorings turning to cold velvet under the lid. The message was as clear as the clink of ice in a pail. In this country, even in wartime, resources could be pointed toward joy. By 1944, electric makers hummed in many camps. Varieties, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, butter pecan, ran past what German parlors had offered before the war. Bars and sandwiches cost 10 cents each. Large camps ordered 100 gallons a week when heat and demand ran high. It wasn't a headline, it was a routine. Sugar, in particular, struck hard. In Germany, civilians scraped by on 280 grams per month when they could get it. In American mess halls, sugar sat in bowls on every table. Quartermaster forms from 1943 to 1945 tally 100-pound sacks delivered weekly to many camps. Bakers used it freely. Cakes, cookies, pies appeared with regularity. Coffee, tea, cereals, sweetened without fuss. In Camp Aliceville, Alabama, a August 1943 humidity spike hardened several hundred pounds. Instead of steaming and salvaging the sugar, as Germans would have done, kitchen staff tossed it and ordered replacements. Prisoners working that kitchen were shaken by the waste. It was an insult. It was a fact. The United States could afford the loss. Chocolate told a similar tale. Despite wartime controls, Hershey, Mars, Nestlé turned out millions of bars each month. The military alone bought 380 million pounds of chocolate products during the war. Camp exchanges stocked the classics. A standard Hershey bar, the high-calorie D-ration bars, other concoctions at 5 to 10 cents. Americans had brand preferences, a trivial freedom that felt radical to men used to scarcity. American Red Cross parcels, distributed monthly, often included a chocolate bar among the staples. Instant coffee, processed cheese, crackers, canned meat, cigarettes, soap. Those packages were luxuries above a POW's regular rations, luxuries that exceeded what German civilians got as basics. The holidays broadcast a different kind of message. Thanksgiving, 1943. Records confirm every POW camp served the traditional table, roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, vegetables, pumpkin pie, coffee, and milk. Feeding that dinner to 425,000 prisoners and millions of American servicemen around the world was a logistics opera. The point was unmistakable. The enemy soldier and the American soldier ate the same meal that day. Christmas 1943 layered on civilian goodwill. Church groups, civic clubs, and private citizens sent packages. The American Friends Service Committee alone distributed 50,000 Christmas parcels. Typical contents: homemade cookies, candy, toiletries, games, books, cigarettes, writing supplies. Towns got involved. In Tonkawa, Oklahoma, people baked for the men behind the fence. In Hearne, Texas, congregations carried cookies and candy to the camp. Mercy aimed at enemies undercut Nazi doctrine at its roots. As manpower shortages deepened, POWs worked outside the wire in greater numbers. By 1944, around 100,000 were in agriculture and food processing. They watched abundance being grown, harvested, and canned. In Michigan orchards, they plucked cherries destined to become maraschino garnish. Fruits meant not to feed hunger, but to crown sundaes. At canneries, efficiency rejected perfectly edible produce for cosmetic flaws. Del Monte documentation from 1944 shows about 15% of fruit turned away for size or blemish and rerouted to animal feed. Sugar beet operations in Colorado and Nebraska revealed mechanization beyond German reach. Individual farms produced more beets than entire regions back home. Prisoners learned that American sugar, cane, and beet combined sat at roughly 7 million tons annually. No wonder bowls brimmed on mess hall tables. They also saw the seeds of a national habit: hot lunches in schools, a concept still forming then but already moving. Milk especially left an impression. Many schools arranged daily deliveries so children could drink fresh milk at noon. The network that could get milk to thousands of cafeterias every day felt more sophisticated than Germany's military supply chain. Some cafeterias even sold ice cream, children paying coins for frozen treats, while German children queued for ration cards. That contrast bit deep. Occasionally, minimum security groups ate in small diners under guard. Those counter stools felt like a civics lesson. The menu in 1944 might list a hamburger at 25 Cs, a Coca-Cola at 5 C, a slice of pie at 15 C, an ice cream sundae at 25 C, a full dinner special at 65 or 75 C. A factory hand and a bank president could sit side by side and order the same plate for the same price from the same waitress. To men raised inside rigid hierarchy, that kind of equality was as startling as any industrial statistic, and still the numbers piled up. By 1944, American output dwarfed German peaks. Sugar, near 7 million tons. The military's chocolate and cocoa draw at 380 million pounds. Coca-Cola's 5 billion bottles in 1943, ice cream production topping 500 million gallons. Milk at 119 billion by contemporary tallies. In Germany during that same period, sugar under severe rationing, chocolate almost entirely diverted to military, soft drink production negligible, ice cream essentially gone, milk sharply restricted. The figures didn't brag, they simply existed, printed in newspapers and passed around barracks. POWs began mailing food home instead of receiving it. Using camp wages, they bought chocolate bars, instant coffee, canned goods, and sent them to mothers and wives in the ruins. International Red Cross records tally roughly 11 million parcels shipped to Germany by prisoners. Imagine the impact. A child in a destroyed city unwrapping American chocolate from a father who had been fed ice cream in captivity. American rationing itself told a story of scale. People grumbled, of course they did, but even rationed quantities overshadowed German life. Sugar allotments of 2 pounds per month per person exceeded German allowances by a wide margin. Meat, at 28 ounces weekly per person, outstripped what many German families saw in a month. One Office of Price Administration metric has Americans purchasing 74 per capita in 1944 despite rationing, a per-head figure that towered over German consumption. The gulf wasn't propaganda, it was arithmetic. The soft drink universe widened beyond Coke. Pepsi-Cola, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, Orange Crush, and regional brands competed in the open market, many bottlers operating in nearly every sizable city. The technology, carbonation, capping, labeling, ran on rails of standard practice. Single plants cranked out millions of bottles. distribution reached every small-town filling station and corner grocery. By war's end, annual output ran into the billions of bottles, dozens for every American, one industry in a nation of industries, and yet its volume eclipsed entire sectors of German consumer production. Spring 1945 delivered the coup de grace. As American forces pushed deep into Germany, POWs in U.S. camps watched newsreels of GIs passing out chocolate and gum to German children. The smiles were not staged. The candy was real. The state that had promised triumph had delivered hunger, while the enemy army advancing down bombed-out streets carried enough sweets to give away. Film reels of concentration camp liberations showed American soldiers breaking rations in half to feed skeletal survivors. Strength expressed as compassion. Between 1945 and 1946, prisoners went home. Many returned heavier and healthier than they'd been when captured. Their families were thinner. The evidence was not abstract. It was visible in faces and belts and the way cheeks filled out. Some men carried their last Red Cross parcels as gifts: chocolate, coffee, canned goods that became family legends. Children who barely remembered the taste of chocolate nibbled Hershey squares brought by fathers who had eaten ice cream all summer. Those fathers often spoke up for a bold idea: the Marshall Plan. They argued that American prosperity wasn't zero-sum. It could rebuild former enemies because it grew from production, not plunder. They had seen a society rich enough to waste sugar and still win a global war. That idea, creation instead of conquest, would seep into West German policy. By the 1950s, the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle, took off in West Germany, and the fingerprints of lessons learned in captivity were everywhere. Former POWs who had walked American factory floors or studied camp supply chains helped transplant methods, mass production that turns luxury into common goods, standardization that keeps quality high and costs low, distribution that floods the market until abundance becomes ordinary. Consumer plenty builds political stability. Industrial democracy outproduces authoritarian command. The insights that showed up first as a bottle cap's crimp or the consistency of a soda's taste matured into business plans and political instincts. The documents stand where memory can falter: military quartermaster ledgers, international Red Cross reports, corporate records, especially the Coca-Cola files, POW letters, censored but preserved, post-war interviews and memoirs, academic studies. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, drew the conclusion plainly. Food abundance sat at the center of ideological change. He wrote that casual American plenty did what formal re-education could not: knocked down the myth of Nazi superiority and then swept away the rubble. Put the statistics side by side, and the picture is impossible to refute. Average POW intake, 1943-1946, 3,300, 3,600 daily calories. Sugar available at 4 pounds per month. Meat at 32 ounces weekly. Milk often available at 1 quart daily. Ice cream served regularly in summer. Soft drinks unlimited for 5 cents each. German civilians in the same period: 1,500 daily calories, 280 gram sugar monthly when available, 10.5 oz meat weekly, often missing entirely, milk tightly rationed, ice cream gone, soft drinks not available, not a poster or a speech, a ledger. For many men, conversion arrived not as a number, but as a moment: the first fizz of Coca-Cola on the tongue, the cold shock of ice cream on the palate on a blistering day, the neat snap of a Hershey bar breaking in two. Sensory memories that out-argued any doctrine. They had, in the most literal sense, tasted a different system, and it was sweet. When these men told their stories to their children, the tales sounded like fairyland. Yet, as West Germany came back to life, reality grew to meet the myth. Coca-Cola returned in 1949 and became shorthand for alignment with the West. Ice cream parlors designed like American soda fountains popped up in city neighborhoods. Candy bars and chewing gum did a kind of cultural work, symbols of recovery as much as snacks. Some former POWs stepped straight into the trade, importing American foods they knew would sell, not for flavor alone, but for what the wrapper promised: abundance, democracy, modern life. The supermarket, alien to pre-war Germany, arrived with their evangelizing. Men who had stared at American grocery aisles understood that variety required a new architecture of distribution. It wasn't enough to make more. You had to move and display it so everyone could choose. In interview after interview, decades later, the refrain held steady. A former Africa Corps officer said in 1975, rephrasing the shock of his younger self, "We expected a weak, divided America. Instead, we found a nation so strong it could hand ice cream to its enemies." In 1985, another veteran remembered his first Coke as tasting like the future. Sweet, fizzing, unnecessary, available to anyone for a nickel. In one bottle, he said, lived everything Germany was not. Abundant, democratic, joyful. By the time McDonald's counted more than 1,400 restaurants in Germany and Coke was everywhere, and ice cream was a shrug, the transformation was complete. But the lesson remains sharp. You can break a man with a club, or you can change him with a spoon. Abundance taught more effectively than punishment. Kindness cut deeper than cruelty. Demonstration embarrassed propaganda. Inside American camps, 3 meals a day and a bustling PX did more ideological work than 100 classroom lectures. Every tray, every bottle, every Sunday layered meaning. Standardization meant trust. Distribution meant reach. A second helping meant possibility. The German prisoners who stepped through that summer gate in 1943 arrived certain of their superiority and their enemies' softness. They left convinced that American strength flowed from a different spring, productive capacity so vast it could share sweetness with foes and not run dry. Democracy's secret weapon was not a machine gun. It was a ladle pouring one more scoop. The sundae, ice cream, syrup, whipped cream, nuts, a cherry on top, turned into metaphor, not just dessert. Any single part would have been luxury back home. Together, it was excessive. And yet, in the camps, if a man still felt hungry, he could ask for more. They went home and carried the message with them, not as a manifesto, but as a memory lodged in the mouth. Freedom, they learned, tastes like chocolate. Democracy fizzes on the tongue. The greatest victory did not come from fire or steel. It came from a nickel bottle and a cold dish on a hot day. In the end, the armies could only subdue. The ice cream, the Coke, the sugar bowl left on the table, those conquered.